The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky here, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have with us Stéphane Hamel. Stéphane, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so Stéphane, you are an independent consultant advising your clients around digital marketing, analytics. You're also a keynote speaker, a pre-seed investor. You've done a lot of things in that space. You've taught at places like Duke and the University of British Columbia. So there's a lot that we can cover here today, but I'm excited to have you on to explore your story, how you got to where you are, lessons learned, and what you feel has really contributed most to your success. And I thought it'd be great to begin in your early years. What got you most excited, and why did you decide to get into the world of data and analytics?
When I was in high school, my grades were really bad. I wanted to go in computer science, but I was told, don't even try. You won't be accepted. Your grades are not good enough. So a mindset or a setup that didn't prepare me to be successful. Like, people were telling me, you're going to fail. So that was not a good start. But then I got accepted. I was lucky. I got accepted in computer science, and it actually went very well. And at the time, it was all about programming on mainframes and working for insurance companies and banks and stuff like that. But there was that obscure little research project that I went to do my internship. And I was lucky. It was 1987. Because it was a research project, I had access to the internet. And the other students were telling me, did you pick this project? Because the internet, it won't go anywhere. C programming and Unix environments, it will never pick up. And why did you choose this environment? And actually, it was really the beginning of working on research projects with complex data, big data, before it was called big data. So all my career, I always worked with data to understand and improve and measure business processes, be it marketing or be it anything else. And throughout the years, I was lucky to work at the Montreal Stock Exchange, for example, where I learned about stock trading. I literally took the class to trade stocks on the market floor. I worked for an insurance company, so I learned about insurance. I worked for a 3D animation software company, so I learned about that. But it was always the connecting point is always leveraging data to understand business processes and try to optimize those environments. And then with the years of experience, eventually I went on to do an MBA, which was something very important for me because I was told that it was not good enough in school. But eventually I did an MBA specialized in e-business. I didn't do a bachelor degree. I skipped right to the master degree. And I've been teaching ever since for over 10 years now, teaching to MBA students, which is kind of a nice return on not being a good student and now teaching to MBA students.
It's very funny when you look at all the people around the world who have been told in their early years that they will not amount to anything. They will never become much of significance or become successful, and to see what they've done. So your story really resonates because I remember I had many teachers as well. I was not a good student in school. For me, sports was my life when I was young. A few teachers who said, like, don't even bother. And fast forward, writing books and content. And I certainly wouldn't have imagined that I would be where I am today. And my father as well, he was told that he would never amount to anything, that he should not even go to university. And he ended up becoming a physician and doctor. So it's interesting that when people say you can't do something, it doesn't mean anything. You can do whatever you want when you put your mind to it.
Maybe one of the characteristics is being an outlier. You don't fit in the usual pattern of what the school system wants you to be. And maybe that creates opportunities to be different, to do something that other people are not doing. So maybe that was part of my success. What really triggered my desire to go and do an MBA was simply I was responsible for several websites and multiple brands across the world and so on. the IT side of things. And I was sitting on a meeting discussing about the strategy, the marketing strategy. And I was just there to listen. I was not supposed to say anything. And at the time, the marketing director said they were talking about the web strategy and so on, but I had some data. I had some data that was saying, okay, this is what the users coming to our site, this is what they want to do. And I couldn't resist. I'm like that. I said, well, I have data that says this is what people want to do on the website. And she looked at me and she said, no, but you don't understand. You're in IT. And that was like a slap in the face. That was like so insulting that I wanted to prove to myself. I thought I knew what the business side was, but I wanted to prove to others also that I understood the business. And it looks like I did, because the grades in my MBA were super good. And as I said, I've been teaching ever since. And I really enjoy teaching. Teaching is such a great experience in sharing knowledge, but also learning so much. And it's the same thing when you do conferences. You learn so much from the other people who are attending your class or attending your conference. It's just great.
Fast forward, because you worked at several organizations, some quite large, but you decided at one point that you wanted to leave and start your own business, right? To become a consultant. For you, what was that turning point? What was going on in your life? Why did you make that decision to leave the corporate world and get into consulting?
There's pros and cons to doing that. Obviously, when you work for a large organization, the last one where I was an insurance company. I had a great position. The salary was awesome, good vacations, compensation plans, and everything was great, except that it was such a big organization that in the time it took them to make one decision, I was eager to make 10 decisions and maybe be wrong on 2 of them, but at least do something. So the pace of the organization was not fast enough for me. So maybe I'm crazy. Some people say that I'm really passionate, and maybe it shows in the way that I'm talking right now. Certainly that, a desire to be able to take my own decisions for right or wrong, but at least have the impression or the sentiment that I was really making decisions. The other thing, maybe we would have to ask my former bosses, but maybe it's because I'm a free electron. I'm just a wild card. And maybe sometimes it's hard to work with me. And again, it's a positive side of my personality, but it might have some drawbacks in some context. But I think it allowed me to push further in many aspects of what I've been doing and sharing my knowledge to the industry also.
So I want to zoom out for a moment and kind of go to a higher level vantage point. For you, looking back over the years of building your consulting business and seeing the success that you've had, what do you feel would have been beneficial for you or even helpful if you knew earlier?
At one point, maybe earlier on, it would have been having the guts to do it. Seeing opportunities, but not pushing enough to actually create the idea that I had or push it further. So maybe that's one aspect. When I was working for the high-end 3D animation software company, the software was being used for special effects in movies, in gaming, and in commercials. And I had this crazy idea, and you go back to 1996, maybe, and I had that crazy idea that people in that industry were really enthusiastic about talking about the commercials. Who's the director behind the commercial? Which company, which agency? What were the special effects? What was special about this commercial? So I had that crazy idea of making those commercials available online so people would be able to comment and share and so on. I talked a little bit about it, but I didn't push it further because at the time, the video quality was not good enough. A few months later, Ad Critic came out, and Ad Critic was exactly what I had in mind in terms of being able to see commercials and just the virality, just being able to reshare commercials and so on. That's an example where I should have done it. I was in a position where I knew the technology, I knew people who could have invested into it, and I didn't do it. And there are many examples of that throughout my career.
That's a great example. Is there one within your own consulting business that, looking back, whether it's around your marketing, your pricing, how you interact with clients, what you offered, is there something that for you now, looking back over the many years of being a consultant and running a business that you feel, oh, I wish I would have done this sooner, or I wish I would have known about that? What stands out for you there?
The big thing, and I've been talking about it for at least 20 years, is I went to a conference. It was the early days of marketing on the web. One of the speakers was talking exactly about marketing on the web. It was really just starting to emerge as a discipline, as a field. I went up to him after the conference, and I was much younger, and I asked him, I would like to be a speaker one day. What should I do? What's the first thing I should do? And he said, write a book. And I never did it. And that's something I still have on my to-do list. I have several drafts of several books of several topics that I started, but I never published a book. And yet I've been cited about a dozen different books, but I never wrote my own. But I did other stuff. I created software. I published other things that had an influence on the industry, but I never wrote a book.
Held you back from writing a book, or what still holds you back? What do you think is that barrier?
Maybe it was a language issue because I'm French speaking. So I didn't want to write it in French because the audience wouldn't be big enough. There would have been other ways of finding a translator and so on. At one point, it was imposter syndrome. It was like, okay, why me? Am I good enough? And still, even after speaking maybe to over 130 different conferences in Europe and North America, I'm not nervous when I go on stage. I really enjoy it. I really like it. But I always have imposter syndrome. Always. Am I good enough? Why me? Why am I in this position to do a keynote or even teach? Maybe it's the lack of confidence, or maybe it's just being humble about the opportunity that I have to share my knowledge. But I think those two things, the language at first and then imposter syndrome. And now it's just being so busy with teaching and consulting and everything that I lack the time. I don't take enough time I write articles, blog posts, and so on, but really writing a book is a different endeavor.
How do you manage the imposter syndrome? Because this is something that a lot of people face. Taking the example of feeling that way before you get on stage to deliver a talk, which you've done 130 or so plus times. What's going on in your mind? How do you push yourself if you know that you're going to feel that way because you felt that way before? What are you doing to put yourself in the position where you still are going after those speaking engagements and then still getting up on stage? How are you pushing beyond the roadblock?
A couple of things. One is, of course, mastery of the topic. If I know so well what I'm talking about or what I want to talk about, that this gives me confidence. The other thing is, over the years, I also worked with someone who's been helping me to become a better speaker, to find what are the little things maybe that I was doing that would improve the performance of my delivery on stage. So that really made a difference. So it's not about making nice PowerPoint slides and stuff like that. It's really about the person doing the presentation. So that was a huge difference. And then the third thing that I would say is seeing other people speak. Some of them are much, much, much better than I am. And some others are so bad that it gives me confidence that, okay, after all, I'm not so bad. I can do it.
We talked about, you kind of identified one thing that maybe you wish you would have done earlier, writing the book. What's one thing that you did in your business that you feel had just kind of an extraordinary impact beyond other things, right? Everybody in business is busy trying a lot of stuff, or they're just working through their business. What's one thing that in your specific consulting business you feel had a really big and positive impact on the growth of your company?
Two major things. One is when I was completing my MBA, the trend in the industry in digital and web analytics at the time, but now we call it digital analytics. The trend was to say web analytics is so hard. It's so difficult. It's like crying babies saying, oh, poor little me, nobody understands me, and so on. And I was like, no, that doesn't make sense, because if we're supposed to use data to optimize the business, to understand the business, it doesn't make any sense to run around like headless chickens and say, oh, poor little me, it doesn't work. So I created at the time it was the Web Analytics Maturity Model. Later on, it was renamed. But that was a major milestone. That was something that really pushed me to do more consulting, more valuable consulting, because now I had something that I was able to use that was unique to me to assess the maturity of organizations. So that was a big part of my consulting. And then maturity model was reused by vendors of different solutions, by agencies. It was referenced and cited in many publications. The other thing is, at one point, I was doing quality assurance of the data collection for web analytics. There was no tool. So I created a tool to solve my own problem. And eventually I commercialized it. I was able to grow it to a certain level and eventually sold it to a company. In fact, I sold it twice, which is a funny story. I created a number of tools like that and also concepts that I shared with the industry and were reused.
You built this tool, you sold it again. Did you sell it and then buy it back from the original?
Yeah. I was lucky because I was advised by a very senior executive who had experience in writing contracts and negotiating, selling intellectual property and software like that. And at the very last minute, in one of the last revision of the document, he said, you know what, why don't you add a little clause that says if the new owner doesn't develop, support, and commercialize the tool, you can get it back for $1. Oh, yeah, okay, let's put it there. And it was accepted because obviously when the company purchased it, their vision was to really build something additional with it and so on. But after a few years, they were not doing anything with it. So I went on, knocked on the door. I said, well, if you don't mind, if you are not doing anything with it, I would get it back for $1. And I literally gave $1 to the CEO of the company and I got it back. And then I joined an agency. And part of joining, I brought some clients, but I also sold them the IP of that tool. And that's, again, selling of the tool was really the one that brought me the most money and rewards afterward. So little statement in the contract made a big difference.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. That's fantastic. That's a really great story. It sounds like both of these things that you're mentioning and pointing out had the biggest impact, both the development or kind of formalization of a framework or a tool set. How do you think through that? I mean, those ideas, very often people will have an idea, but then they won't do very much with it. Can you kind of give us like a very fast walkthrough of how you took from just an initial concept to actually developing those model and then promoting it? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is probably the complexity of creating something new. You need to be creative on the one end, but also maybe I'm applying what I'm preaching is when there's a complex problem, analysis and analytics is how you can split out that complex problem into smaller parts. And then if they are smaller, you can actually do something about it. You can measure it, you can optimize it, you can build a solution. And that's how I did it. Both of those things were pretty complex at the time when I did it. It's just one step at a time, which is very similar to anyone who has a startup and wants to build a new tool. It's a big project. You have to start somewhere. So maybe that's simply how I did it.
I'm going to push a little bit more on that because I want to try and extract a bit more of your experience from you to help others with this. You've identified there's a problem or a challenge in the industry or in the marketplace. You have been able to identify a solution, that solution or a better way of doing things. You tried to make it simple. And the way to do that was to create a visual model or something along those lines. So kind of like your maturity model. So you have that, but how do you go from having this thing on paper that can make sense to people when you show it to them or walk them through it? In your case, how did you go about getting that adopted and getting people to accept that and to start citing it or writing about it in different publications? Like, it sounds like that maturity model led to the increase of visibility and attention and your status as a thought leader in the space. How did you actually take this intellectual property, this model that you had built, and have it adopted and kind of distributed and promoted?
The bulk of it was research and more like academic and so on. But I wanted it to solve a real world problem. So it needs to be applicable in the field. I could have taken the path of having a patent and licensing it, but probably the adoption wouldn't have worked at that time, because it's a matter of being able to get it out there and get that model being, I was always saying, used and abused also. So the test of fire, see how it works in the field. And I think it's a combination of having a great idea that you can bring to reality, but it's also a big part of that is networking. It's the network of people that I knew at the time. When I presented the maturity model, one of the first time I presented it at a conference, I was told by many people, been there, done that, it's not useful. The famous quote, all models are useless, some of them are useful. Again, people telling me it's not useful, it won't work, but still pursuing in that direction. And eventually but it took years to actually work. Maybe one of the mistakes, and the same thing with my software that I created, it's the protection of the IP that was really difficult. Seeing people using my work without any reference, without any citing that I worked on it, and that they were inspired by what I did. That always hurt me a little bit, even to this date, because I spent so much time on it. It's really my creation. And of course, I was inspired by other people, other work, and I always make sure to cite where the inspiration came from. But I brought something that was on top of that was unique.
Stéphane, it sounds like, just to clarify, what helped to get ultimately the adoption of this model, which led to the kind of increase in visibility and perception that you are a thought leader and expert in the industry, it took a couple of years. But from what my understanding, you're saying that it came from really networking, sharing it with people. And then a big part of it was bringing that into your talks when you would give like speaking engagements and things like that.
Yes. Somebody once told me sharing knowledge strengthens your own. And it's still true. So my desire was to make sure that I was sharing the information so other people could use it. Hopefully they would get back to me. So in my consulting practice, I never paid a dime to pay advertising, to get contracts, to get some work. It's always been word of mouth. It's always been through the articles that I've published and the work that I've done. Eventually you reach a point where you have to pick your clients because there are just too many opportunities and a limited amount of time in a day, in a week. And maybe that's also why I wanted to create the model and make it available, or the software, because in my mind, consulting is very difficult, because I like to say that what you're selling is your brain juice. That's what you're selling when you're consulting. And there's a limited quantity and limited market price for that. So the only way to scale is either you grow your agency or you create a product. And the product is very expensive to create. It's very risky, but if it works, then there's the network effect and exponential potential benefits.
Let's zoom in now to your area of expertise, data and analytics. Is it really only useful for larger organizations, or can smaller firms like consulting firms also benefit from understanding data and analytics?
I think it's for all businesses in all functions of the business. If we take marketing, there's absolutely no way you can do marketing today without understanding the performance of what you're doing. And in order to do that, you need the data and you need to measure and you need to optimize. Otherwise, you're just throwing money and hoping that some of it is going to be viewed by some people and maybe they're going to purchase. So to me, it's essential. That's why I'm teaching marketing and I'm teaching analytics also. There's no way around it. If we think of HR, human resources, they are visible on the website. There's competition for skilled resources. all those aspects. You need to have some measurement in place to understand, okay, am I reaching the right people? If I hire someone, how can I make sure that I hired the right person, going to remain here? They're going to bring their friends and so on. So that, yeah, every aspect of business, it's essential.
And when you think about the small consulting firm, let's say maybe up to about 50 team members and below, what are the most common mistakes or misunderstandings or opportunities that you see people have around the area of data and analytics?
One of the approach that I use is, imagine you have a triangle with each of the angle is at the top, you have the business aspect. So as an agency, it's hard to pretend that you know the business more than your client, but you bring some expertise, some approach and concepts to help the business. And then the other angle is what makes it possible to build a solution. So be it a website or be it a campaign, you need people who are able to activate or enable the result, the product itself, the creation of something. And then the last angle is people who are problem solvers, who are analysts. They can understand the data and extract information and extract knowledge that will inform the business. So that creates a dynamic where each part is important and feeding the other. So as an agency, you have to pick if you're going to be an enabler, so building the solution for your clients, if you're going to be specialized into maybe some verticals or some type of businesses, so you work on the business side of things, or if you're going to be more on the analyst, problem solving, performance improvement, effective communication of what you find in the data. And there are agencies that are really, really specialized. But the thing is, as an agency, typically an individual is the same thing. You are very strong in one area. You are pretty good in the other, good enough. But the third one is you can't be good at everything. So you have to recognize what are your strengths and weaknesses in each of those three areas and just develop that, work on your strengths and do more of that and bring more clients aligned with your practice.
Is there one thing that stands out to you, like very common mistake that you see people making when it comes to data and analytics?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is probably reading all those articles that says top 10 things to do whatever. Those are all clickbaits and it works to some extent. But the difference is that when you're a good analyst, you understand the best practice. That's fine. You can read those top 10 and whatever. But if you really want to be a good analyst and really go above and beyond that, you need to be creative because you want to not only to do the best practice or do as well as your competitors, but you need to do better than that. And that requires creativity. So it's interesting to kind of say, okay, you need the data, which is really non-creative, but you need to be creative in order to make sense of that and come up with solutions that are the best solution, but considering that there's always constraints to that.
Could you provide an example of what that would look like? Get the creative juices flowing for me. So let's just take a small consulting firm, has 10 people, and there's some data that, there's going to be data in every company, but they could track the number of leads coming in. They could track their proposal win rates. They could track how many articles they get published, different things like that. So that would be some data. So they'd have some different data sources. What's the creative part? Where is your mind going right now, Stéphane? As I explain that, what would be an example of thinking on the creative side of using that data?
One thing that I see very often is the desire to say, oh, if you want to get this paper that we wrote, you need to fill out this form and provide your name and your cell phone and your telephone number and email and title and a bunch of information. And too often what happens is when you do that, many agencies and companies are putting behind the label white paper or something like that, something that is really just a marketing piece. There's no research behind it. It's just selling documents. But because they want to have those contact information, they put that ahead of the quality of the information they are providing. And what happens typically is that people will fill the form, but they will put junk in there. So it's not very useful. So why not do a test? Why not see if having the form there because you have a desire to get the contact information, maybe there's a better way. Maybe it's simply that in the document itself, you make it easy to reach out if the client in a B2B context, if the business wants to reach you, they know how to do it. So little things like that where it's creating friction. What do you prefer? Do you prefer to have a bunch of contact information that are useless because it's all junk? Or you want to get your word out there so people will reach out to you because they want to reach out to you?
I think that's a really good kind of distinction, separation. It is very easy to just look at and track things like, how many leads are we generating? But at the end of the day, it's not about the number of leads. It's about the quality of those leads. And even more importantly, the number of people that you end up engaging with and they become clients. So I think that's a great prompt for everybody joining us right now to look at what are you doing right now, even just from your marketing perspective, or it might be from your hiring side. And how could you look at it from a different perspective? How could you make it better? How could you improve the experience?
You simply have to test it. And the same thing happened with subscribing to a newsletter, where typically there's way too much information that is being asked. And what the person really wants to do is just subscribe me to the newsletter for now. And maybe I'm going to be more disposed at a later time to share more information about me. But don't put it in my face right away and ask a bunch of information that will come in the way of the initial goal, which is I want to subscribe to the newsletter. Make it easy to do business with. One of my other former boss always used to say that, make it easy to do business with. Remove all the roadblocks, all the constraints. People will know how to reach you if they like what you're doing.
Stéphane, before we wrap up, I want to find out from you in the last 6-12 months, what's been one or two books that you've really enjoyed? They could be fiction or nonfiction, but just something that you found to be valuable or inspiring, motivating.
I read Digital Marketing Analytics, of course, things that are in my field of expertise. So that was one that I read, which was interesting. And then the other thing also, I switch between books related to my work, but I also like to read historical novels or fictions and reading about World War II. I was in London at one point visiting the bunker. And there were those dashboards, graphs of how many ships were built and how many planes were shut down and stuff like that. And in a large part, that's how the war was won, is you produce more and destroy more than the other party. And that's how it works. So I like to be reminded of what we're doing today. In many respects, is not so different. Yes, we have social media, we have the internet and so on, but there are some core concepts and core principles that still apply today. And that's really hard to convince the younger crowd, the students, that it's not because TikTok is there and it's amazing and whatever, that suddenly all the other things are different. Sometimes it's good to read books that just remind you of that.
Is there one book you read or listened to recently in that space?
A series of books on World War II. I'm trying to remember Eagles Over Britain or Eagles Over Europe, something like that, which is quite interesting. Amazing stories of people who had to fight something that was in a way much more challenging than COVID.
We'll try and link that up in the show notes. Stéphane, Hamel, thank you so much for coming on, sharing some of your journey with us. Where should people go to learn more about you and your work?
Easiest one is simply Google stephanehamel.net or my LinkedIn profile are the two best way to reach me.
Sounds good. We'll include that as well. Stéphane, thanks so much for coming on again.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.